Let's go. Yeah, so picking up from where we left off, you know, um, I mean, I really appreciate, all the things you're sharing right now because I think a lot of people when they're in school and deciding between different programs, oftentimes there isn't one that clicks right away. And some people also don't completely jive with school, period. Like they're more like hands-on people. And so, like, things you're saying actually like it holds a lot of hope and promise for people who are still in that situation right now. Um, and I was wondering how, if you ever needed to come to a state of acceptance around doing lots of different kinds of things versus one thing, and come to peace with needing to leave certain jobs along the way.
For me, it started out as a necessity thing.
Mm-hmm.
I chose a major when I was in the States that
Mm-hmm.
Queens didn't have. So
Mm-hmm.
then I was kind of thrown into I took like sociology, anthropology, and then when I went to Queens, they weren't offering it that year when I
Mm-hmm.
first transferred. So then I decided to take psychology for a little bit
Mm-hmm.
and political science because I thought, with a psychology degree, it was really hard to find jobs.
Mm,
Um,
okay.
unless
Yeah.
you got like higher,
Mm-hmm.
unless you got your master's or did your grad school,
Mm-hmm.
or you would just become a teacher. And
Oh, yeah, because if you want to be a psychologist, it's like you need your master or doctorate, even, right?
It's a
yeah,
long path, very long path there.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it's expensive too as an international student. Every year is way more expensive
Mm-hmm.
than. Um, so then that wasn't a feasible option for me.
Mm-hmm.
So then I switched to political science and realized that I couldn't work in government as well because I wasn't a citizen.
Mm-hmm.
So all the internships and everything in Ottawa were always, you had to be a permanent resident or a citizen for you to work in local government, which is
Oh.
fair. So I was kind I was thrown for another loop, and it was a lot of money. School was a lot of money for an international students, and I didn't want
Right.
to spending this money if I wasn't guaranteed that I was going to be getting a degree that I could use. And
Mm-hmm.
a big thing was my parents were always talking to me about how, oh, you're not going to get a good job unless you have a degree. People really need you to get a degree. And in a
Yeah.
sense, that is true. In a sense, lots of jobs want you to have a degree. But
Mm-hmm.
I've also found that a lot of jobs are satisfied with the fact that you went through university.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of jobs, unless they're pertaining to your line of study and your degree, a lot of jobs just want you to have that life experience, that experience of going to university, of learning to learn and learning how to simple things like write a paper,
Mm-hmm.
or learning professionalism from being able to communicate with professors and work together in a group in a seminar course when there's only 12 of you. They just want you to be able to work together. And a lot of times jobs were okay with me not having, a poli-sci degree
Mm-hmm.
per se. I just said, this is the years I went to university. These were the courses that I took, and they were totally okay with it. But
Wow.
again, I didn't choose a career that was very, I didn't walk into a government building and said, I took 3 years of poli-sci at Queen's University. I would love to work in Ottawa now. And they just opened their doors for me. But I think a lot of times jobs like that, you do want to finish your degree and you do want to follow that. But I knew that I wasn't going into that right away. And I knew my financial situation with, you
Mhm.
know, being an immigrant and not having to pay my international student fees. And
Mhm.
my parents aren't wealthy. I didn't come from a very well-off family. They're
Mhm.
still living in Hong Kong. They're living in like government housing in Hong Kong. They're
Mhm.
not they're not the type of unfortunately they're not the type of parents who could like buy me a house and like support
Mhm.
me until I figure something out.
Mhm.
So
I
I
see.
kind of took that as I'm going to get whatever jobs I need. And I have a very hard-working work ethic, and I feel like I think that's very cultural. I think a lot of Asians are like very hardworking, almost to a fault, where we
Yeah,
work.
almost to a fault. Yeah.
And when I was when I was in, when I first moved to Edmonton and I was kind of getting started, and I was, my ex was in school and I was working 2 jobs to support the 2 of us. I was working, I would work in the daytime and then I would go bartend at night, and I would have a different job on the weekend. So sometimes I would work, 3 months without a day off, multiple jobs. There was a time I was working 3 jobs. I was working at the bridal salon, and on the weekends and evenings I was at like a little bar downtown. I was bartending, and then I was also making things to sell at like local stores. So I was doing a lot of things, and for a while I was getting really tired and really burnt out. But I knew that's what I needed to do at that time, because I didn't follow your traditional like get your 4-year degree, get into an office and build your way up and climb that ladder. So it essentially comes down to like, I'm willing to do the hard work, but I'm also now at a point that I've done the hard work that I don't need to anymore. Like I'm able to, like, I moved to Kelowna. Kelowna is expensive to live in, but I was able to move from Edmonton to Kelowna. I traveled Canada in a van. I bought a brand new Ford Transit and built it out and traveled coast to coast with my partner. We went all the way from Vancouver Island. We started in Edmonton. We were very, very sick. We started in Edmonton, went all the way to Vancouver Island, drove all the way back over, went to Nova Scotia, did Newfoundland and Labrador, traveled the Labrador Highway, did the northern route kind of through like northern Quebec, and then came all the way back to the West Coast. So to be able to have done all those things, it's not easy, because I didn't have your traditional job, but it was also nice that I was able to step away from my jobs and do that, because I didn't have like a 5-year contract. So I kind of feel like for me, when to leave is just kind of when I leave things if I'm able to and if I want to. So if I'm stuck somewhere that I'm really unhappy, then I just make a plan. I ask myself, like, why am I unhappy in my situation? Whether that's a living situation, whether that's apartments I've moved or jobs I've left, I've asked myself, why am I not satisfied with it anymore? And if it's something internal, like if I'm like, oh, my expectations are too high, then maybe that's something I can adjust. But if it's like, it's not working for me anymore because I don't like how my kitchen is set up and it really bothers me every day, then I'll look for something else that has what I'm looking for. And then same thing with jobs. If I'm like, oh, I don't like going to work anymore because it stresses me out every day and I don't enjoy being stressed for 9 hours a day, then I'll look for something that, is okay pay wise, because unfortunately we have to talk about money. Because, every time you're like, oh, be a free spirit, travel, do what you want, you always have to think about money when you don't come from a very wealthy background. And I don't come from a wealthy background, so I don't get support from my parents. So everything that I do traveling or recreationally, everything is from the money that I make myself. That's something you think about too, is like, if you're unhappy in your job, can you get a job where there's less stress? Or is there a job that you can do that you can be happier? Or can you stick it out until you can save enough for you to make that move?
Right.
And is there anything you can change at the moment that will make your situation slightly better? Like, I've never really left a job unless I've had another job lined up. Like, even bouncing between all my jobs, when I decide to leave, I always make sure that I have a backup plan, because I don't have family that is my backup plan. Like, if for some reason I lose my job and I'm broke and I couldn't do anything else, I'm sure my parents would help out. They love me and they support me, and they definitely would, I'm sure, be like, instead of being homeless, here's some money. But I don't like putting myself in that position, because I've made the choices I've made to have this life that I'm living. So before I leave a job, I always make sure I have another one, unless I'm traveling for an extended period of time. So I was unemployed when I was traveling, and I was traveling I think it was like 6 months that we were on the road. So it's just before I leave something, I always make sure that I have a backup. They say, when do you leave? When you know that you can leave without it being too devastating financially.
Got it.
Like savings, I can afford to move from this apartment to the next apartment, then I'll move only when I know that I'm not going to become indebted by a certain move.
Yeah, it's yeah, I really love how you break it down like step by step, and it's like this, you know, it's very logical. I'm sure like we could probably build like a decision tree, like just based on what you outline, and that tool could probably be helpful for a lot of other people in a similar situation. And yeah, you know, thanks for, you know, walking us through your thought process. So yeah, I guess like, you know, knowing what you want, knowing that you know, fight, you know, having an income is really important to you to have like the power and freedom you're looking for, and independence you're looking for. Yeah, that I guess that made things very, very clear for you. And it gave that, you know, just decisiveness as well, in action. So yeah, kudos for that. You know, just being very intentional with your time, and you know, yeah, what you choose to do. And yeah, something I wanted to explore further was actually from our previous recording. You actually had ended off our previous recording mentioning that it's not like you found out throughout your life that it's not about rebelling against family, but kind of finding yourself. And I'm wondering if you could speak more to that, because I think a lot of people could benefit from that too.
Yeah, so I had given a lot of thought actually about why I do the things I do. About why I've chosen this way, or why I've decided not to apply for graduation and take the route that I have. And especially coming from a super traditional background when everything was expected. You were expected to go to university, expected to get a degree, expected to go into like an entry level and then go from there, like climb that ladder. But for me, and one of the things is like we talked about tattoos, like I have a lot of tattoos as well. So like different things that I've kind of broken from the norm of my family. And it was just finding out my intention, like you said, very intentional. I'm not doing these things because I'm rebelling against my family. I'm doing these things because they give me purpose, and they give me, you know, I'm driven by something that's internal. And I'm not chasing after my parents' approval or disapproval. And for me, as soon as I was financially independent, I was able to make these calls for myself. And it took my parents a long time. I talked about briefly last time about my mom and my tattoos. And in the beginning, she was just horrified because she had this idea that tattoos were, you know, criminals or like gang members. And it was disconnected. Like her little daughter, her only child, that was like getting all these tattoos on her body. And now my first tattoo, I think I got like 14 years ago. And now I have obviously a lot more, and she's definitely come around to the idea that not all people who have tattoos are bad, and not all bad people have tattoos. She's kind of able to make that.
Yeah.
So I think for me is my tattoos were never about rebelling, and my jobs were never about rebelling. And for me, it's important that my family understands that I'm doing these things because they're truly good for myself. And I think that's why my parents are, they still send me, so my parents are really religious as well, and my mom sends me devotionals like every day on WhatsApp. Every day. She'll send me like 5 devotionals or like 5 messages. And I'm not religious. I just flip through them like, oh, thank you. So they are still trying to like, quote unquote, not change me, but, you know, lead me down the right path in their minds. But they've also understood that I'm able to be healthy and I'm happy, and the choices that I'm making in ways that could be seen as, you know, destructive or unconventional hasn't led me to any harm. My choices has led me to live a life that I'm very happy in, and I'm very healthy and happy. And I think at the end of the day, as much as Asian parents want us to do this or that, they still, like, my parents still love me, and they're still me when I'm happy and healthy. And those are the two things I think that are the most important. At the end of the day, you cut everything else away. Why do your parents want you to be a doctor or an engineer or, you know, all these different careers? Is because they worked really hard for us to have a healthy and happy life. They want us to be able to pursue our dreams and live in the ways that maybe they were not able to, especially like first generation immigrants. You know, I know people that were doctors and nurses that came over to Canada and they can't get their accreditation here. And so they work at stores, they work at, you know, grocery stores, they're like, I've talked to people who are janitors that were professors back home, you know, so they're just doing jobs, you know, whatever job they can to make their way. And so I think that kind of passes along to their children, even back home. Like, my family's from Hong Kong, and I know they, like, the generation before us had to work really, really hard to be able to afford living and a good standard of living for their kids. So I think my parents, that was like the base of all the worries, and the base of all, like, oh, I want to brag about my kid being this or that, is just that they want us to be able to afford to live happily and have the means to be healthy and happy. Like, I'm sure they wouldn't want us to work 20 hours and like be super burnt out, but it's just hard to make that distinct difference of like, how hard do you work to achieve these things where you can lead a comfortable and happy, healthy life. Because for them in the past, it was always like, the harder you work and the more you like ingrain yourself in a certain career, the longer term you can be happy and provide for your family.
So that's so true. It's like, wow, it's like you really get the essence of Asian family.
I spent a lot of time thinking about why. Like, thinking about why we're driven to the things we are and why there's so much cultural pressure. And I think it just comes down to like, Asians are very, like, our culture is very, like, we take care of each other, right? We take care of our grandparents. We live with our parents when they get old, and then our kids take care of us. So there's already this.
It's like an act of service that Lena realized as well. It's all about, you know, I give you a lot of things, you know, I'm investing so much in you. So you need to, like, you know, maybe grow up and pay back a little bit to us. You know, my parents are like that right now. These days we've been talking about it actually. So it's kind of, I really feel that resonant. It's funny because I in my heart, I sometimes think of not paying back to them as much as they give me. But then I feel I can maybe give them half of what I got maybe in the future, and the other half leave it for me, you know? It's like, and then the Western culture is more like, individualism, you know, like you want to, like, yourself is the most important, and then the other people. But in Eastern culture, a long time is that, you know, it's like others are more important. You need to take care of others, maybe take care of yourself next. So that's the major difference I've realized these years, and it's really interesting. And when I talk to my Asian friends about this, they were like, "Wow, I didn't know that." I'm like, "Yeah, that's why your parents want you to really, you know, work really hard." And they're not really working hard. You know, they're just like a lot of international students from China come here. They're just, you know, have fun, go out, buy lots of luxury cars, goods, foods, and just, you know, spend all their money that their parents send them into Canada to study. Actually, those money is for them to study, but they spend all that for all other things. And I feel like that's, you know, it's like I feel very hurt when they're doing that that's why they think I'm very, you know, I'm very appreciative of my parents. I guess in some aspect, I'm very loyal and respectful to them, but because I've seen, you know, people using that much money to, you know, buy a, like, it's already good with a Mercedes Benz and they change it to a Ferrari. I'm like, is that really, like, does that really matter? Like Benz and Ferrari.
It might matter to them, right?
Yeah,
they gave them like a heck ton of joy, right? Like,
yeah. And then in Western, you see like most kids are just doing their own things, not, giving them back at all when they grow up. And that's also not that good. You want to make it like a middle, I think. Give something back to your parents, but don't, spend all what the parents give you and buy a Ferrari, for example. A Mercedes Benz is good enough. And then, so that's what I got from both sides. And I feel like, wow, because I have both sides culture, I can really see different sides very clearly. And that's really cool.
And it's interesting because you're kind of in this middle of it, because you live here, and you see the Western side. So like your Canadian counterparts that grew up here that didn't have that that not obligation, but it is an obligation to give back to your family and to take care of them. So you see that, and you grow up in this society that for the majority of Canadian society, it is about, how can I advance myself? And your parents take care of you, and then you take care of yourself. And then after a while, like, you leave the house, and that's separate. Like, your parents' finances are their finances. They've saved for retirement. And then you grow up and you start putting away your money for your retirement. So you're living in this very Canadian place. But it's interesting that you also notice how like the international students come in and do that, because that's a divide as well, because they're the generation that's coming right now versus the generation of like our parents when they were young. Like coming to Canada for Canadians 30 years ago, for like coming to Canada for Chinese people 30 years ago, they may not be in the same financial situation as the international students now that, are buying fancy cars. So I feel like now you're in the middle, and you're seeing these two both Chinese immigrants, but coming from
a lot different. Yeah. Like their minds are very, actually in some states, and I mean, these international Chinese students really want to be independent. So it's like in a lot of time, they're pretty westernized, their thought, like values and all the other stuff. But then at the same time, because they know that they have that ability because their family is rich, and then, have a lot of well off, and all that because their parents worked super hard generations ago, and then, try to give them this great family so they can spend it all they want, which is definitely not true, because you want to save some for yourself. And like, even though maybe you came from a well-off family, not like saying me, but these friends of mine, these international Chinese friends of mine, some of them are really rich. Like I've actually talked with them, and then they never really mentioned that much. So I kind of knew what's going on, that iffiness and all that. And then, so I know, but I'm like, you still should save some money. And that's what I told them. And they're like, wow, you really know how to manage your finance. I'm like, yeah, because if you don't, you're going to grow up, become poor. You might be like in your 30s and you're already so poor, like, does your parents going to give you all that money forever? Like, dude, think about it. I mean, they're rich. Yeah, but that's your family rich, not that you are rich, You have to maybe fight for your own life. You have to work hard for yourself. But not saying working too hard, but, you have to work hard for what you think work hard is, right? So it's like everyone's working hard is different. Some people think that working hard is just like, it's pretty chill and they just do something and they'll achieve all that. Some people think, I have to work like till I don't eat lunch, I don't sleep. Oh my gosh, then that's work hard. That's these sides are all two extremes, right? You want to be in the middle. Like, so that's why I think my definition of working hard is really in the middle. I do like, as long as I think that I'm working hard already, I achieve, or like I think that I'm working hard. I don't really care too much about the results because I just think that I work hard. So the result will come naturally. Even if it doesn't come too good, it will come someday. And so I'm not too worried about the result. I care about but I really want myself to work hard because I only care about the process of working hard. So that's why I think I can kind of find my own happiness these days too, because I feel like my happiness coming from working hard, and that's it. Like it doesn't really come too much from the result. So I guess I get myself really detached from the result already. And that's really great. That's been what I've been realizing these days, because when I was younger in high school, I think Lena knew my happiness always come like everyone else, always come from the result. If the result's good, then I'm like, yay, hooray, I'm a successful person. If it's not good, then I'm like, oh, I'm such a failure, I didn't get into university. But nowadays I'm like, even though I'm in Queens now, I'm in a university and it's so great in Canada, but I don't feel that, that success of successfulness. I don't feel like, oh, I'm better than other people. I just feel like if I work hard, then I'm a pretty successful person already. If I didn't, then, well, even if I'm in Queens, I'm still not a successful person. So to me, working hard means successful to me. So I have a really interesting thought on my own. So that's like when I mentioned to my friend, they're like, oh, that's an interesting perspective. I'm like, yeah, I've got a pretty sick perspective because everyone cares about the end result. Like most of my Asian friends, they obviously do care about the end result, blah blah blah. I'm gonna be a web designer, I'm gonna be blah blah blah. I'm like, dude, stop saying you're gonna be like bunch of stuff, just work hard. It's like the act of working hard is already you're successful. Like, why do you always want to be this, be that, and
I
then
mean, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be that as well. It's just like, yeah, some people like they really do value being productive. I've noticed last couple of weeks as I was taking more of a chill break, I was feeling depressed, right? So it's like, yeah, I need to like work at a certain level to feel like, okay, yeah, I release my energy and then I'm all good, right? So, but yeah, Ming, I wanted to sort of like revisit the topic of being like to be or not to be a rebel, because I think like sometimes a lot of people, after being raised super traditional for so
Mhm.
long, there's this frustration that builds up and this, like tendency to want to just be like,
Yeah.
right? To like all the shoulds. It's like,
Yeah,
screw that, right? Like I want balance, I want like my
totally.
freedom, right? And did you go through a phase like that and then kind of realize that, oh, actually you wanted something kind of in the middle, or
Um, so that is actually very similar to my upbringing. Like one part of it is that my parents are Asian, but they're really religious as well. So I went to a boarding school, and that was something that my boarding school saw a lot because it was a very religious boarding school. Like we weren't allowed to hug a boy because,
mm,
save room for Jesus, um,
that is
things
quite
like that.
beautiful.
So a lot of people from my school would go off to university and then have that like rebellion stage. And I think I kind of did too, but I don't know if I've always rebelled since a young age.
Mm-hmm.
Like I got my tattoo when my first tattoo, I think I was 16 when I got my tattoo. I was still living with my parents.
Right.
Um, and I don't know if I was intentionally rebelling or if I was just kind of like I've always kind of thought of things in like a harm scale. Like if I do
Okay.
something, is
Yeah.
it harming anyone or is
Mm-hmm.
it doing any good?
Mm-hmm.
Like, are my actions positive or negative? And that's the way I've always viewed things.
Mm-hmm.
I was taught a very religious upbringing that I've now realized was damaging for multiple reasons. But I've chosen to step away from that. And
Mm-hmm.
me choosing to step away from that wasn't a act of rebellion. It was just what was healthy for me.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that, like I've been to therapy, so I have worked through a lot of things with someone else, and I think that helps as well.
Mm-hmm.
Craig,
Yeah.
oh, hey, sorry, my dog.
Yeah, I can tell you've done a lot of inner work, and I was actually wondering if you got like some particular training, but
Yeah.
yeah.
So like the rebellion thing, I've kind of always looked at things as like, who is this harming if I do something?
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
something like getting tattoos. My parents could argue that when I first got my tattoos, it was harming me because A,
Mm-hmm.
physically it hurt, but
Right.
B, would that harm my job perspectives? Like,
Mm-hmm.
would people not hire me? Would I
Mm-hmm.
be viewed differently in society? And
Mm-hmm.
I weighed that out and I was like, you know what, for the career that I wanted and the
Mm-hmm.
things I want to do with my life, that wouldn't harm me. And now we're in a world where it's very normal for people to be tattooed, even doctors and lawyers, right?
Yeah.
So that I weighed that out a while ago and I decided that. And
Mm-hmm.
for me, rebelling, like I went through a phase where I like partied and drank and like did all this stuff, but I was always careful to make sure I wasn't harming
Mm-hmm.
other people. Like I
Mm-hmm.
was just Was I partying? Yes. Could I afford it? Yes. Was I, like I spent a summer in Hong Kong, and partying in Hong Kong is very different than partying in Canada. The bars stay open until like, I don't know, 4 or 5 in the morning when I was there, but that was also in 2010. So that was a long time ago. I haven't partied in Hong Kong for a while because I haven't been back for a while. But back then we would go out all night. We would take the 6 a.m. train home. We would take a couple hours of sleep, and then we'd go to work for like 9 or 10 a.m. And then after work, we would go out again. So it was like I was young. I was able to do that. I was able to keep up that lifestyle. I was also going to work. So it was like, am I able to afford something? And then who am I harming by doing it? So I feel like lots of people will rebel, and I think that's kind of finding yourself, right? And I'm not saying that we should just rebel and do everything that our parents told us not to do. Like, I've never done super hard drugs because that's never been a big thing that I've wanted to do. I have done like other stuff that I've wanted to try, but I've never really, I don't give in to peer pressure very often. So I think that helps me when I was doing my rebelling stage.
Right.
For instance, when we were in grade 6, we went on a trip and everyone jumped in this glacier lake, and everyone got little like polar bear dip awards. There was 2 of us in the class in grade 6, and I was like, it's cold. This is dumb. I'm not gonna do it. And I was like, oh, if you do it, you get like an award. I'm like, it's cold. This water is freezing. I'm not gonna get in this. So I did. I just sat outside and I was like, you guys are dumb. So I feel like that's a good example of how I lead my life. Is I look at something, I see if I want to do it, and I see like, hey, if I want to do it and I can't see any terrible consequences, I'm gonna do it. And I think for rebelling, I don't think that it's wrong to try things, as long as you're able to try things in a safe manner that you're not going to make terrible decisions. So,
that makes
lots
sense.
of Asian parents talk about not dating until you get married. It's the joke. It's like, oh, do you have a boyfriend? Oh, no, you shouldn't have a boyfriend. You're in school. And then after you graduate, it's like, oh, are you married yet? Why are you not married yet? And it's like things like that, or drinking or going out. So I think like going back to boys, if you decide to date, that's great. Be careful so you don't get pregnant and change your life, things like that. It's like, if you want to go out and like party, great. Make sure you're partying with people that you trust. Or like, if you want to try drugs, okay, make sure that you know where your drugs are coming from. You've tested them, or you're with people that can guide you if something bad happens. So it's like, I think rebelling it's such a broad term, but because it kind of covers like anything that society or your parents or your culture tells you not to do. That could be anything from like wearing white on Chinese New Year's could be rebelling because you shouldn't wear white.
Right.
Or like, so if you look at things, and for me, I think we should kind of we shouldn't live our lives based on what everyone tells us. We should live our lives based on what we think is right. If everyone is telling us something that we agree with, then we should live our lives just like everyone tells us. But that's only if that's true for you. I have friends that went straight from high school to university, straight from university to a career, and then they got married, and now they have 2 kids, and they're my age. And I'm like, they're now stay-at-home mom. I'm like, that's great. They lived like the perfect life. Go to school, get a degree, get a job, get a husband, have kids. Now they're raising their children, super happy. And that's really good for them. And I'm super, super happy for them. That's not my life. And I wouldn't do that. But I wouldn't tell them to do things any other way. I don't think they should have lived their life like me at all. I don't think they would be happy if they did that, because they're so happy in what they have. So I think rebelling is so broad, but I think you really have to figure out what you want. And if rebelling is part of that self-discovery, then make sure you're doing it safely, and make sure that you're not making any decisions or doing anything rash that can like completely ruin your life or whatever, change your life in a way that you're not prepared. But if you decide you don't want to rebel, then there's no need to. Like, rebelling is such it's like this thing that everyone expects you to do. or like everyone feels this pressure of like, oh, now I'm free, I should do something. But it's like, maybe you don't need to. Maybe you don't need to experience it. If you're happy with what you're doing, then that's great. But if you find that you kind of want to try new things and branch out, the most important thing is just make sure you're safe.
Yeah, it's like we've got like, we've got like these two labels called like conformist and rebel, right? And it's still, I guess it's still up to us in our internal compass to decide how much of each we want to do. But
Totally.
yeah,
and it's funny because I have a friend who he went to school. Now he's like I don't know, he does microchip engineering, I don't know, something techie. I'm not techie, so he like sounds, he's like, look at this tiny microchip that I soldered. I'm like, very cool. I know nothing about it, but he's a rebel. He's the black sheep of his family. He's the only one that went to post-secondary. He's the only one who has like a stable career. So for him, that was rebelling. He came from a very like, his family was a family of hippies. They traveled the country and like lived very freely. He said his family lived on like a hippie commune for a little bit when he was like very young. So that's like really for him, cool. That's rebelling, going to post-secondary and getting like, he's like a software engineer. I don't actually know because I'm not in the tech world, but like he's some sort of small thing engineer, but that's his rebelling. Right. And so it's funny to see what constitutes as rebelling coming from your background. So you're super conservative, then maybe getting tattoos, that could be rebelling. But if you come from a family like him, going to post-secondary, getting a 9 to 5, that's his rebelling.
Yeah, and I've also heard of like parents who are not very nice, and they try to tear their kids down when their kids try to like, exceed their own success. And those kids would be definitely rebelling too in that context. And it's really interesting, like as you're bringing up these things, right? Like even the example of dating before marriage, I realized that, wow, like the way I naturally respond to these cultural restrictions is actually I get influenced, right, by like a lot of the fear. And it's like, oh, maybe I want to try, let's say, polyamory, right? And it is like, but then I have all these fears of like, oh, is this like moral or ethical, or am I going to make a terrible mistake by not doing the tried and true thing that's been tried and true for a long time, blah blah blah, right? Like I get all these fears, and it's like my mind likes to blow them out of proportion. But it's just so refreshing to see you come in with like a different mindset around those things and be like, yeah, actually, I don't actually see like what's the huge harm of this particular choice or that choice, as long as there's like transparency and necessary safeguards and so on and so forth.
Totally. And I feel like that's huge in Asian culture, is like dating is, I want to go as far as to say like we're expected to be in heterosexual relationships, and a large expectation of that is to be with someone who is from our own culture.
Right.
More and more it's less so that, but like you want to be in a straight relationship with a successful man who is nobody wants to say it, but like you're Chinese, find yourself a nice Chinese boy. But not until you're both done with university and have stable careers. But it's like at the end of the day,